Hello, hello. Welcome to day 3 of the Soil Summit 2024. Biodiversity, cultivating life. Let's all do a dance. Been at it for a couple days. I see some smiles. I'll take those as dances. That's good. I can feel the energy moving inside of you. I see you. It's so wonderful to see people jumping in from all around the world. Portugal, Ireland, Canada. It's me. South Africa. Beautiful to see you all. So thank you for joining us. And the UK, California, the USA, awesome. Africa, did I say that one already? Quebec, wonderful. It's so good to see you. Thank you for carving out the time and supporting the Soil Summit and supporting our speakers. Just remember, we don't share any of your personal information with the speakers. So if you want to follow them and learn from them, go to their websites, sign up for their newsletters if they have them, find them on social media, give them a follow and give them some love, and pop into their inbox and DM them. Let them know how much you appreciated their session and maybe what you learned from it and how it's making a difference in your farming or gardening or life journey. We are in for a treat next with Glenn Elizinga from Alderspring Ranch. And Glenn graced us with a beautiful interview about tripling your organic matter in Heart and Soul magazine. And that interview is on YouTube. So if you want to go check that out, you can check that out. And he's really kind of one of those dream interviews because he has a depth of knowledge in ranching that is vulnerable in terms of it wasn't always necessarily great. And so he had to figure out how to make it great. He had to figure out how to make things work when they weren't working, when his fields were full of mud and they weren't getting the return or the crops that they wanted. He had to figure out a different way and a better way that worked for him. And so he's worked really hard at that. He's had some tremendous successes. And some of my favorite stories are where he actually looked towards nature and noticed what was happening with the livestock that was running through his farm and applied that to the way he works with his cattle. And so I'm gonna just pass it over to Glenn, and he's gonna bring us through a slideshow, and then we'll open it up for Q&As at the end. Please drop your questions into the chat as they pop into your brain, and we will make sure that we circle back to them, or maybe even pepper them in throughout the presentation, depending how it goes. So thank you for joining us for the Soil Summit. Glenn Elizinga, thank you so much for carving out the space to be with you, because we know that you have horses and cows and family and mountains to range.
Yeah, so I'm just grateful to be here. And it's supposedly our least busy time of year, but I don't know. I say that every year, as winter is coming, my least busy time of year is coming. Natalie, I'd love to do that interview. And of course, we're kind of absolutely buried right now in stuff going on. And it's just right now it's snowing pretty hard. It's been snowing for 2 days straight, which is we're very grateful for, because up till now, it's been the driest and probably the warmest winter we've ever had. And there's alarm bells going off in a lot of people around here, and a little bit in me. So it's been a little stressful. I have a great crew on, but this business of, building your productivity and profitability also means that if you want to continue, you're probably going to expand. And that's where we are now. We're in an expansion mode. We're running more cattle than we ever have. And as a result, that brings with it a new set of ordeals that you have to deal with. When we're a small place, we started with 7 head. We started from almost nothing. Carol and I just had this vision to start ranching back in the early 90s. And we started with just 7 cows, and we had 60 irrigated acres. And that's how we started. Now we're running a little over 750, and it just brings new challenges, because it's just scale. You're just thinking about scale now and scaling up. and you're always having to shatter a paradigm that you were in. So anyway, we could just get started right in with the slideshow here. And the other thing I wanted to say to the audience is, and Natalie, you brought this up, this potential. I'm totally okay with questions midstream. I don't, I might get on a roll with a story or something like that, but maybe Natalie can interrupt me after the story's wrapped up or something. And then, we could field a question or two because, if it's on the tip of somebody's tongue, I certainly want to deal with that too. And Leslie, just chime in here, quit your button pushing if you have questions or maybe answers. I want to hear them too. So I'd like this to be kind of an interactive dialogue. That'd be wonderful. So now
Beautiful.
I'm going to go down and share the screen. Is that okay? Do that now?
Perfect. Love
Okay.
it.
Okay, this is kind of a general setting of what the country looks like. It's big country. We ranch on 70 square miles of central Idaho mountains. This is my middle daughter, Linnea, and she's trailing some of her cattle up there on the range. And I'll just give you a real quick overview of what the whole place looks like and how we roll through the grazing season. So you got some background, so you kind of know, I just want to provide some coat hangers and shelves to put ideas and thoughts on, because otherwise I'm going to be speaking out of context, and I want to just create a little bit of context for you to get going on. So anyway, I'm going to just tell you, I'm going to just actually take you with us on what a growing season looks like. And I'll say growing season, and it's kind of a funny deal for us because we live at about 5,000 feet. We ranch, a lot of our grazing is at 7,000 feet elevation. And the growing season is kind of a questionable term sometimes because at most we have 90 days. Okay. And it can snow and freeze. Our garden has frozen solid on 4th of July. So that means that, that growing season can get severely truncated by night frost. We've been up with the cattle at 7,000 feet in a whiteout blizzard, first week of July. Okay. Second week August, you're back into whiteout blizzard potential again. Very tumultuous change. I will blame it all on my friends in Canada for shipping that kind of Arctic weather down to us because we all know Canada is just Arctic, right? I mean, anyway, we're just an extension of Canada, is what it is. And they send us their toxic weather sometimes, and it just absolutely wipes out our growing season. So it's very frustrating. Anyway, we start out with this is about, I think 450 yearling and 2-year-old cattle, and they're the foundation of our beef program. And we take them, we split them into 2 groups, and actually there's a little more than that. We keep about 200 head home, and we call these our finishers. These are the cattle that we're actually going to ship as organic grass-fed beef during the course of the summer, while all of our cattle go to the high summer ranges. Our high summer ranges is about a 650-mile walk through the entire summer for a little over 100 days of grazing up in the high mountains. We basically follow the snow line as it melts, and that grass grows up behind the snow line, and we just gain elevation following that phenologic change of grasslands as they grow and express. So we put our cattle up there on horseback, and we follow them up there. But this bunch is the bunch that stays home. There's about 100 or 200 of them, and they're the elite finishers. They're going to gain like 3 to 4 pounds a day. The ones we take up on the mountain, not so much. The other thing we run here on the home place, you can see a center pivot right here over us. There's 12 center pivots on this place, and there's probably about a total of 1,500, or no, I think it's more like 2,000 acres of valley bottom ground that is this highly productive irrigated grassland that has an equivalent of about 25 inches of rain a year. And we put that down with these pivots, and we run mama cows also down here that are calving in May and June. So you can see there's just a whole bunch going on in the spring. We have a whole bunch of different cattle portions living, on different places on the ranch. So now just come with me for this 650-mile journey. It's all on horseback. We live with the cattle 24/7 up there, and there's about anywhere between 400 and 500 head of them. And we start along the banks of the Salmon River in these cottonwood forests. We spend only a few days down here. Salmon River is a long, wild river that winds all the way through the state of Idaho and cuts through many major mountain ranges. Salmon River runs anywhere from 7,000 feet elevation all the way down to 2,000 feet, all the way through Idaho. And it just cuts a chasm all the way through Idaho through peaks that range up to 11, 12,000 feet. So then after spending those few days, we just hit the low elevation sagebrush steppe. And this is an extension of what we call the sagebrush ocean that comes all the way out of Nevada, Wyoming, Utah. It's just a huge Great Basin, basin and range sagebrush grassland. And it used to be a lot more grass than it is today. We're trying to bring that back. Now it's mostly sage dominated. I don't think it was always like that. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that a little bit later. But here you can see we got a pretty good spread on the cattle. I don't know if you can see them here. Um, there is riders out there. There really is. I took this picture, and it's usually my kids. I have 7 daughters, and we also run about, I think 12 to 15 interns, and also 2 or 3 range rider employees as well during the course of the summer. And we all go together up there. Anytime on the ground, there's like 3 or 4 people on a crew. You can see we're bumping up now. Up here where my mouse is pointing is the Salmon River Canyon. That's where we first started grazing. We've crawled all the way up along these mountain ranges here. And now we're in middle elevation blue bunch wheatgrass. And you can see, here's a picture of me, my daughter took, and I said, take this picture because this is a cool vantage point for a PowerPoint or something like that. And I like it because it shows the edge of Table Mountain here, which is the edge of my mouse pointer here, and Taylor Mountain over here. And Taylor Mountain is a long ways away, and Table Mountain's a little closer. It's only about 8, 9 miles away. Taylor Mountain is about 12 miles away. I'm sitting about halfway up the 70 square mile range that we graze on, and it's just our grazing right now. We just share that wild country with just wild animals and our 400 head of cattle. So you can see why it's quite a journey. But what's interesting about this picture is everything you see is certified organic. It's one of the larger certified organic contiguous parcels in the world. There you can see how we live. It's just in these little teepee tents and a cook shack. And we have a few string of horses up there. Usually there's about 20 head total in camp. Most of them are over the hill. You can't see them here. And we also have a night pen that we put the cows in at night to keep them safe from this guy. This guy came into our country with a storm in the 90s. By the early 2000s, we were losing cattle. By 2013, we were losing way too many cattle. It was going to take us out of business. And this is where Natalie and Leslie were talking about, getting in touch with nature and having a heart for the land. I think that's what Leslie said. She said, make it a heart-centered thing. I realized that, when we started on this grazing project up there in the high country, we weren't really disconnected because Carol and I were kind of, we're ecologists. I was a forest ecologist. Carol's a PhD plant ecologist. So we're really in touch with what the natural systems were up there. But there was a difference, and it was because we were acting on this natural system instead of being part of it. And these wolves, when they came in and descended on us, it just, we came home literally licking our wounds. We had cattle that were injured. We had a lot of them dead, and we lost about $40,000 in cattle that year. And we said, hey, that's it. We're done. We're not going to go back out in the wild country this year. We're going to come up with another paradigm to graze these yearling cattle. And so, one thing led to another, and it was just a lot of thought. We just started thinking about ancient herding. And we realized that nobody in the world was really doing it anymore, except for some people we knew of in Africa who were dealing with big predators. But nobody was living with their animals anymore. And it used to be that everybody lived with their animals because there was these top of the food chain predators out there. And there's also rustlers, there's poisonous plants, there's bad grass, there's poisonous water. There's all these things that we dropped the ball on by just turning cattle out on the ranges. That's standard operating procedure for most people in the West right now. And we were doing the same thing. We're riding a little more than most people because we're trying to protect critical riparian areas. There's about 55 miles of creeks up there, but we still felt like we weren't doing the job ecologically that we thought we could. And when we came up with this idea to start living with our cattle to protect them from wolves, we realized that we might have struck on something really critical in that we could now target our grazing and manage it to exactly mimic what the ancient rhythms of grazing were up there, whether it be bison. We used to have very significant herds of thousands and thousands of bighorn sheep, and we had these small mountain herds of bison. And by herding up there and by living with these cattle for the rest of the year, through that entire grazing season, we could mimic those natural herd rhythms, and we could coexist with the wolves. So it kind of killed two birds with one stone. So this is what we started doing. We started keeping them 100% out of riparian areas. These are the creeks. There's 55 miles of creeks up there. They have fish in them and stuff. And our cattle were damaging them before, but that always kind of bothered Carol and I because we hated the fact that our cattle were hard on creeks and those sensitive riparian systems because that's where 90% of the habitat is up there. Because you can see it's still dry land, it's dry grazing. So we just started riding and herding these animals all in a pod like this across the landscape, and we started living up there. You can see our little cook shack tent where my mouse is there, and there's a few other teepee tents in this aspen stand. Here's one more teepee, and you might say, "What's that person doing way out there?" Well, that happens to be the night ground that we chose. We put a hot wire in there, and that's where we're going to put the cattle this night. There's a little water tank we plumbed in there from this creek down here, so we keep them out of the creek even when they drink. And those cattle are going to be in this night ground overnight. And we got one person up there sleeping with her dog. It's my daughter. She said, "I don't mind the night grounds. It's okay." But somebody needs to be there in case we have wolves entering in the night and just keep our cattle safe and keep the wolves out. So you can see it gets really kind of hairy up here as we gain elevation because you get into very, very thick timber. We graze most of this country all through this thick timber with that 400 head. And you can see our little teepee tents down there in the right-hand corner in the little tiny meadow. And we have a little horse fence down there too to keep our string of horses there. And our cook shack is right here, just out of sight. And you can see we just live with those cattle. And here's the thing I really want you to get. We're really following the trails of these guys. And I think that's so cool because there are the trails up there. Their trails are still up there. And it just dawned on me a few years into this, we were following the paths that these guys did before us with our domestic cattle. And so now, we're trying to get these wild instinct traits in our cattle while we're up there. And here's the other cool thing. Look who is also here. We find these points on these trails that we walk. These ancient hunters, these ancient native hunters were there as well. And they knew to follow those animals on those same trails that we use today. And sometimes the trails are really hairy. They're super thick with brush. They can break people. They haven't broken any cattle. The cattle seem very adapted to what we're doing. And I like this picture because it shows, to me, it's a beautiful shot of just biodiversity. There's so much going on here. You got these conifer forests, you got these big high alpine meadows. But look at this on these cattle. As a cattle guy, these cattle are just glistening. See how beautiful they're shining. When they got that shiny hair on them, that means they're healthy. A lot of cattle in confinement don't have that shiny coat. And here's the other thing that's really cool. There's no flies on these cattle. And we're organic. We don't use fly tags or anything like that. These cattle are beautiful because they can be. They live on this plethora of wild plant diversity, and they're very comfortable up there in this situation. Here's what it looks like from a long ways away on the low end of the range. That's 400 head right there in that little tiny pot at the tip of the arrow. I took a picture of it just so you can see the scope of the country. There's 3 daughters and about 400 head of cattle in that little blob. Here's my middle daughter again. We're entering higher elevation timber, and this is what we've come for. We've come for biodiversity. There's 2,200 native plants up there. And what's interesting is there's so much value nutritionally in these plants for our cattle, and we're grazing it such that these plants are actually increasing in density and diversity. And I'll talk about how to do that in a little bit because it totally relates to the subject of the Soil Summit. Then in the winter, we come off and you can see we threw all those cattle together. There's about now 700 head of cattle in this bunch. And here we are deciding whether or not we're going to graze these banks of the Pacimarai River because these guys live in it. We have Chinook salmon, king salmon coming up from the Pacific Ocean. I just saw that they're thinking about listing king salmon out of the Alaska strain, which is some of these fish here. They come all the way 900 miles up the Columbia River to spawn on our ranch. So if we do graze along the river, it's always with fence line buffers. We never allow cattle access to the river itself because these fish are spawning. There's gravel beds in the river itself, and cattle damaging them could be critical. The other thing we have is a hay operation that just feeds our cattle over the winter. And this year we had some very interesting operations. We had two big weddings because I got seven daughters, remember, and they're all adults, and two of them decided to tie the knot this summer. And that was actually, for me as a grazer, it was like the most beautiful experience of my life. But on the other hand, it was a little bit of a disaster on the ranch because we were trying to put together a wedding for 300 people two times and cook for them, get everything set up and do the whole 9 yards. It was an all-day event and it took weeks to prepare, and it was a lot, but it was totally worth it. Even though my daughter and her new husband don't dance really well, so it was very enjoyable to watch them. But I do have one of my daughters who's a very good mandolinist, and we have a little band that we played. We played a bunch of music, and the bride got to sing a bunch of headliner songs. It was fantastic. And here's my youngest daughter, and the only freak show that stresses me out, I have a little PTSD about this picture because you can see her gown is down there on the ground and her gelding is about to step on it. And this gelding is only a 3.5 year old. I'm on a 3.5 year old little mare. And and I keep looking down her. You can see I just turned sideways and kept looking down. I said, Maddie, that dress. Because, I just imagine an eruption and horse bucking her off or something like that, just prior to the wedding. Anyway, we rode up to the gang of people that were down there seated on the big meadow, and it went off without a hitch, so to speak. So it was a beautiful day. And I'm throwing this in there because to me, and I think you'll get this through what I'm relating to you today, to me, it's not about like specifically Glenn is a rancher or Glenn is a farmer or Glenn is a soil health guy. It's really this whole picture. And this right here, what I'm showing you in these pictures with this wedding is absolutely 100% part of the operation. It's part of what we do. It's part of life because we, you know, our lives have been inextricably woven with this land, with this soil. It's just like Leslie said, it was it's become heart-centered. And I want to talk about that journey today. Anyway, here's the last wedding we had in October, and beautiful family gathering. The aspens were starting to turn gold. It's fantastic. And this is what happened because of the wedding. Usually I run grazing much, much better than this. And to me, this looks like a golf green, which is totally the antithesis of how we graze. But I will tell you, that nature is very supportive of weddings and has a ton of resilience. When you've built that in, when you've invested in the living soil, nature has your back. And that was life-changing for me because I had no idea how much nature had my back until we had a bunch of 20 below zero this January. And Melanie, my oldest daughter, was moving the horses out there, and they are fatter than ticks. And we haven't fed a horse yet this winter on this ground. And she was like, "Boy, they look so good, Dad. I want to go find out." And we run a lot of horses. I think there's 45 of them right now that we run because we use a lot of saddle horses over the summer. And these horses are out there digging. And the reason they're digging in January with the ground frozen and it's 20 below zero and the wind is blowing and there's snow on the ground, the reason they're digging is because there's still green grass underneath that snow. And that never used to happen. That never used to happen. When we go into the fall and we start getting some below zero stuff, we go into dormancy. It was full on dormancy. I mean, the plants were shut down. They were brown. It was brown fields. And now I'm looking out there right now, and there's green fields out there under that snow. I know because it started snowing about 3 days ago, and it's February now. And I made a little video about it that we're going to put on Instagram because there's all these plants that are coming up and they're green. And, I was scratching my head why. And Nicole Masters, pretty well-renowned agroecologist, has spent a lot of time on the ranch here. During COVID, she lived here for 2 months. And we just love to have her. And she rode with us on saddle horse. But we talked about this very thing, and it just came back to me in my mind. By the way, I just want to have a disclaimer. None of this stuff is Glennisms. I haven't come up with any of these things. I'm just the passive observer. I really don't have any background knowledge. It's all on the shoulders of other people like Nicole, or Fred Provenza, or all kinds of people that have taken from to actually sharpen my ability to make these observations. So anyway, here we are, green grass, under soil. And I recall the conversation I had with Nicole, and she said, these plants will continue to be green and continue to do photosynthesis despite it being a horrible winter, if there's a living soil matrix underneath them to support their health. And it's because that living soil matrix, despite the cold, is still going. She said it's still going very slow, but it's still going. And it's actually generating heat that enables this to happen. So that was very cool. Here you can see where a horse ate stuff down, but you can see some really new green shoots coming up here under the snow, 20 below zero. And, we used to think, I told you that, we're 3-month grazing season, 3-month growing season. And now we're realizing, because of the living soil, that life has changed. Now you're probably wondering how we got here. And this is how we got here. This wasn't us back, 20 years ago. We weren't able to get a marbled steak. We were raising grass-fed beef, and everybody told me grass-fed beef is supposed to be lean, Glenn. It's supposed to be chewy and it's supposed to be a little tough. So, just put up with that. But I I had neighbors that put cattle in the feedlots all the time, and it's like, wait, they can get marbled beef. Why can't we get marbled beef? And I knew enough about feeding corn because we used to do it way back in the dark ages. In the early '90s and late '80s. We were feeding corn, and we could get them fat as this, but it was unknown to get cattle fat on grass like this. And these steaks we just harvested a month ago, right off our grass, right off our place. So it is possible today. And you're wondering what changed probably to get that level of marbling, that level of fat deposition in these grasses. We didn't know either. We just knew we need to increase the energy. So what we did was we headed down a road, and it was the '90s. There was very little information about this. And guys, this wasn't about soil for me. This was strictly the fact that Glenn wanted a marble steak. So, we went into this rotational grazing, which is non-continuous, high density, short duration, long rest period grazing. It's called many things. It's just basically rotational, MIG, adaptive, multi-paddock grazing, any of those. Anyway, it's temporary paddocks, use hot wire to move them. It mimics native grazers like bison and elk. These cattle right here on alfalfa, we're probably moving them 2 or 3 times a day. Here's Abby, my middle daughter. She's flying a drone while showing how it gets done. It's super easy, super elegant. And that started to change the cycle of events. And I'll tell you in a little bit why. The other thing we started doing was we started feeding hay very judiciously through the winter. And by judiciously means we want to always leave enough, because these cattle had to gain weight. So that meant we were overfeeding them. And we always tried to feed them good hay. And we always tried to feed them in areas where they would be able to stay clean and unstressed. Because remember, we're trying to gain weight on these cattle. So you start thinking about stuff like this, and you're always putting this hay on clean ground and always getting them well distributed. So everybody gets their belly full, even when it's 20, 30 below zero. And so we move them across this ground, and you can see we're starting to get a lot of manure deposition here in this place where they graze. The other thing we started doing is we started incorporating wild stockpile grasslands into our grazing paradigm. And we didn't even realize what was happening, but as we moved these cattle through these intense stockpile areas, we were starting to lay down the grasses and integrate them with the soil. And we just didn't really, it didn't really click about what was going on, but we just did this because the cattle were performing better. And that was our goal. We were cattlemen, right? We were ranchers. And yeah, we really did care about all this stuff. We cared about these native grasses, we cared about diversity and stuff like that, but we never really were thinking that much about what was going on underground. And look at this. This is a text. This just kind of captures the thought of how we started changing our mind. It's really about changing minds. It's not about changing a process or changing our practice. It's really about changing our mind. Here's a text string between my crew. I have about 7 people on right now. And I'm just reminding them because a lot of them are new to this. I said, feed crew, small slices when you can, please, in this wet soil. Long, thin line. Do not allow cattle to concentrate. Those plants are our livelihood. The cows are employees. Make them win. And what I wasn't realizing now, I know that there's a lot more to the livelihood besides the plants. It's the soil underneath them. But back then, we were thinking these plants are a livelihood. The cows are employees, make them win. But there was a new level that we started embracing and figuring out as time went on. The other thing that, becoming certified organic in 2005 was we're seeing an amazing amount of biodiversity in terms of plant life and in terms of insect life. This is up on the range. We have no honeybees up there at all. These are native bees. We have no honeybees because, it's 20 miles to the next beehive and bees don't fly that far. So these are all native bees. We have 400 native species of bees in Idaho. And in a lot of places, they're losing all their bees. And this is biologically intact up here. All these bees are doing very well. And it just excites me. Here you got like I think there's 8 or 9 bumblebees on these pictures. And these are just riparian areas that we stopped grazing up on our ranges. And, now I'm seeing these plants express. And when you see these plants express, you get to see these animals express. I can't even find the ID on this butterfly, but it really likes this senecio plant. And it's just striking how beautiful they are. This is I think this is called a painted fritillary. And it's actually pretty common. It looks kind of like a painted lady, but it's a fritillary, and it becomes very common along riparian areas. And we're seeing tons of, lepidopteras. These are all the moss and butterflies, tons of hymenopteras, all kinds of honeybees, lots of bumblebees, and tons of wasps and parasitic wasps. It's nature running amok. And I think the core issue about it is that there's no spray. There's no spray. There's no sides up there. These are the pesticides. These are the fungicides. These are the insecticides. These are the herbicides. This is also, I put sides over as an umbrella over other things as well, like nitrogen fertilizer. These are chemical applications to our ground. And when we stopped seeing chemical application to our ground, biodiversity ran amok. I hope you can read this. This is very, very interesting. We used to use ivermectin on our cattle and various sorts of porons to keep the flies off. Now we don't do that anymore. But check this out. This is, one of the sides things that we're just finding out now. Conventional use of ivermectin disrupted ecosystem functionality, affecting species richness, abundance, and biomass, resulted in long-term accumulation of dung on the ground and considerable changes in soil functionality. We were actually seeing this on our range in 2005 when we took over that grassland. There is still cow pies up there today, not degraded, sitting there, fossilized cow pies, because they can't be, because dung beetles won't access them at all. Just completely affected species richness, abundance, and biomass, and the convertibility of dung. And historically, there was buffalo dung up there. So these same animals are trying to recycle through the dung, but they can't. And it's because, there's this cascading effect. Ivermectin on a cow's back gets sucked up by the cow, comes out in manure, gets dropped, affects biology in that soil system way up there on the range, 20 miles from the ranch, a little inconceivable. And people who are practicing conventional agriculture don't even think about these things. But I glom onto something like this because I was observing it. We're seeing poop that was not getting broken down from my previous land manager's cattle. And I see it, we picked up a piece of lease ground just down the road. There was poop everywhere, unbroken down. And now it's finally getting broken down. Not that poop, but our poop that goes up there, from our cows. They lay dung pats. They're getting broken down. And look at this. On ivermectin treated sites, this isn't, you don't spray ivermectin on the ground. It's on a cow, and the cow's depositing manure, 35% lower species richness, 44% lower abundance per dung pat. Those to me, I just wanted a little bit of, numbers clinchers there, because a lot of people are like, well, that kind of stuff really doesn't affect that. No, it totally does. Whenever we introduce chemicals, into an ecosystem. Now think of how crazy the degree of effect is if we apply chemicals directly to the ground. And I would submit to you that, I've been going to a lot of soil conferences and stuff like that lately, just because I'm starting to geek out on this stuff finally, because I'm starting to understand some of it, a very small part to be sure, but I'm starting to see some of it. And I go to like these no-till conferences, and these no-till guys will get up there and say, we took our soil organic matter from 0.7 to 2.45. And that we believe that's a ceiling. That's we've hit the organic matter ceiling. Well, guys, I'm running on 7.75 organic matter on my place on average. I got friends who are over 10. I talked to Gabe Brown a while back. I think he's got fields that are high as 16. We have one field down here that tested 17. I don't think there's this sky's the limit. It's the sky's the limit. It's not the ceiling. So I'm trying to, I'm on the way home. I'm on the way home, driving home, trying to figure out why they're hitting these ceilings. And the thing that's almost ubiquitous in these no-till conferences is there's still a presence of spray and soil amendment fertilizers, chemical use. And I'm just wondering, yeah, they're way reduced. They're saving a lot of money by not putting that much on anymore. But I'm wondering if that's their ceiling. They've created their own ceiling. And as a result, they're stuck here. They're stuck. And it wasn't until we became certified organic that we became unstuck. And the ceiling broke off and the sky became the limit. So look at this. Remember, I'm not a soil guy in this picture, but we're seeing cover diversity and yield go crazy. Okay. And then we started digging underground. This is when I had the geek moment, because we had soil tests. NRCS helped us do soil tests all over the ranch in 2009. And in 2009, it was 2.45% organic matter. We thought that was pretty good because some of our neighbors were around too. Okay. Anyway, we took this thing in 2022 again. Our average across the whole place, and this is now a 2-year thing. We do it every 2 years. Our average across the whole place is 7.75. We did a soil test 2 years before that. It was 6.45, gaining over that 2-year period. And we have fields as high as 17% organic matter now. And then all of a sudden I realized, wow, it wasn't about the grasses, even though they were part of it, because they were the soil collectors. They were taking the photosynthate, those sugars, and putting them down in the ground and feeding that soil biology. But it was the soil that was making everything really kick butt. So then we started doing infiltration tests, because remember, I started to geek out. I started reading all this stuff. I'd go to soil conferences. I wasn't into stuff below ground at all, because I took 3 soil classes back in the 80s. And you know what? They just talked about structure. They talked about chemical, like pH, and they talked about infiltration, and they talked about compaction. And soil biology wasn't even talked about. Okay, now fast track to today. I'm looking at this, geeking out on this soil thing in my hand. I'm seeing this aggregation, which is due to glomalin. Glomalin is produced by mycorrhizal fungi, which are the partner fungi to a lot of these plants, very host specific. Anyway, look at this. We started doing soil infiltration tests. It's where you put this 6-inch ring, 15 centimeters, and you pound it into the ground. And then you pour water into it, and you measure in 1-inch increments how fast the water goes down. So when we started doing this, I was just blown away, because we'd irrigated 2 days before. We put like a 1/2 inch of rain down with our pivots, and we were finding out that our infiltration rate was incredible. I had no idea. It was 2.75 inches per minute. If I calculated it out for an hour, if we could take a 9 to 10-inch rainfall event in an hour on this ground, even after irrigation, without any runoff, the water was all going to go in the ground. And when that just did a tipping point in my mind, I went ding, because all of a sudden I realized that it was going to save everything. It was going to save, all kinds of money in terms of irrigation. It was going to save our green grass staying alive while we're cutting hay. It was going to make it grow back better during the hot summer slump. It was going to allow us to get through spring times without being buried in mud. And I'll talk about that in a second. So look at this. Because I have soil underground, our cover went from 60% cover to 90 to 100. A lot of it is 100%. You can't find soil anymore. It's totally protected by this grass. And diversity went from 12 species to 85 on our home places. So who cares about this cover? And this is such a simple thing. And I talked to Gabe Brown, not specifically about this, but I saw something he wrote right after that about this. And so I just extracted it. Sorry, Gabe, if you're listening, I stole from you, but I did give you credit. So anyway, check this out. If the soil is 70 degrees Fahrenheit, and I don't care where you're measuring this in the soil, it could be down low, it could be, right on top in the O layer or whatever, I don't care. So if it's 70%, you're going to keep 100% of your soil moisture. Okay. If it's at 100 degrees Fahrenheit, you're going to only be able to retain 15% of your soil organic or soil water. Okay. That means 85% is evaporated and it's not getting transpired. This is not, evapotranspiration through the plant. This is just flat evaporation to the atmosphere. Okay. Now look at this. You go up to 130, 0% is retained. And at 140, everything is dead. You remember Bones? I don't know how old, I was Star Trekky when I was a little kid. Okay. Anyway, Bones McCoy, the doctor, he always said he's dead, Jim, because they'd find some guy who got shot by a phaser or something on some weird planet. But anyway, that's a saying now if you didn't know that, but it's relevant to Star Trek. Anyway, he's dead, Jim. So that means everything in the soil is dead. And you're like, well, that's ridiculous, Glenn. Who cares about 140 degrees Fahrenheit? Who cares about 130? That's not even real. Well, I'll just tell you right now that even at 5,000 feet elevation in central Idaho, where it doesn't really get above 95 degrees during the day, it never goes hardly ever above 100 degrees a day. I'll take a soil thermometer and I'll stick it in the top layer of a plowed or disc field that's bare. And let me tell you, it's over 130 in a heartbeat. In a heartbeat. By mid-afternoon, it's cooking and he's dead, Jim. That means you killed all the life. And look at this. Even where I screwed up this year with the wedding, remember that picture? It's the same little steer. He's been standing there for days waiting for me to take this next picture. But look at this. Even it being, 2 to 3 inches, because of the diversity and the wellness of those plants, even because we grazed it a little too far here, there's no bare dirt exposed anywhere. Our soil is still safe. It is 100% safe because it's covered. That's one of the 5 tests of soil health, right? It's one of the 5 things. First thing is number 1 is keep the soil covered. So who cares about diversity? I keep mentioning that. And this really didn't click on me until I spent some time with Fred Provenza. Dr. Fred Provenza has become a friend of mine, professor emeritus at a Utah State University, the author of Nourishment. Great guy. I don't even believe he wanted to come out here, but I called him one day. That's what you got to do, guys. You just got to call these people or email them or send them a handwritten note or something. You got to touch base with these people who've been out there. Fred's getting older. I don't know how old he is now. I think he's in his low 70s, but he really likes putting into people. That's the kind of guy he is. He's a giver. And I called him. I said, Fred, this and that. I'm wondering if someday, if you come through here, I'd love to. He just interrupted me. I'd love to. When can we do it? And I gave him a date. Sure enough, he showed up and we went out there. So we're watching these cows, these steers eat up on the ranges up there, and we're seeing some really interesting things. And I didn't know they were interesting until he started pointing them out. That's the way this works, guys. This is not Glenn thinking rocket science. This is Glenn being surrounded with rocket scientists. Okay. So anyway, Fred's up there. He said, look at what they're eating. And I'm like, what are they eating? And he's like, well, they're eating that plant, and that plant is high in tannins. And I'm like, so? And he said, I think this is why your cattle are so healthy. It's because their palate is telling them to eat that particular species of plant. Because to maintain their health at optimum levels, their palate is educating them on what the plant choices should be. And that animal is now going to choose according to what their palate is telling them, based on what their biochemical needs are at a given time, based on what phytochemicals, the plant compounds they need. They're able to actually determine what they are, first by experimentation, second by taste, and third by intuitive knowledge that's in the cow. That who knows how that got there. Anyway, he said, just watch them select these plants. He said, I think this is why your cattle are very healthy. This is why they have that shine, remember? And this is why they don't have flies. And this is why you don't have to worry about worms, because they've maintained themselves. They're self-medicating because we have placed in front of them what I call the cafeteria. Natalie, if you and I are going to go to a buffet, and it's not, a garbage buffet, say it's a really good one at a really good food store or something like that. You and I are hanging out, and we go grab a cup of coffee, and we say, hey, why don't we grab something to eat too? You go down one side of the buffet, I go down the other, and we end up, it's 100-foot long buffet. Okay. Say this is a dream. Okay. And we come out the other end, and we sit down at a table together, and I look at your plate. I guarantee it's going to be 100% different than mine, right? I mean, almost guaranteed. Leslie, your plate's going to be completely different than mine. All right. And the reason is, it's because we have a taste, we have an affinity for certain flavors at different times in our life, different times of day, different days of the week. We have an affinity, just the other day, I usually eat mostly meat, but I threw some carrots in a stew for my wife, and I was like, wow, those carrots were dang good. We found some organic carrots in the store, I brought them home, and it's like, what the crap? Who knew that I'd want a carrot, And so we put those carrots in there, put some really nice celery in there. And it's like, I said to my wife, I said, that celery was actually legendary in that stew. I couldn't even believe it. And she said, I've been telling you, you got to eat more vegetables. And she's totally right, but anyway, we have an affinity, and it's in us, it's in our genome, and it's in these guys' genome. So that's why diversity is important, because we're enabling the cafeteria. Okay. And it's very specific too, because when you have this diversity, that biota on top is very specific to the biota underground. And I think we've lost that understanding. Just like I didn't know anything, I didn't care what was happening underground. Now we're finding out that mycorrhizal fungi are very host specific. Okay. They're super, super attuned to one host. It's one plant, it's one myco. Okay. One plant, one myco. It's not there's an overlap. Okay. So I got 85 species of plants out there. Say 60 of them are mycorrhizal dependent. They have a relationship with mycorrhizae. That means there's 60 different plants out there, and 60 different mycorrhizae. And look at this. I don't know what kind of grad student figured this out, but I read a paper that estimated how much mycorrhizal hyphae there is in 15 centimeters of soil on 1 acre, 24,000 miles. Guys, that's the circumference of the earth at the equator. It's just this interstate highway system of water, nutrients, sugars all across the soil profile. It's not only down, but it's across. And when we put a plow down, when we rip that ground open, when we disc it, guess what? We sever it all. I was at a cover crop conference a few months ago, and we grow some cover crops. And I said, guys, if I disc my cover crop in, I'm not using herbicides. If I disc my cover crop in, what happens to my soil biology? And 100% of these guys, some were just no-till guys and weren't necessarily organic. They said, you just push the reset button. And it was because of this. I ripped my interstate highway system to pieces. Now nothing moves across the soil profile. There's a guy named, he's a climatologist, and he's a soil agroecologist in Australia. His name is Walter Yene, and he coined this word, the living soil sponge. And that's what this interstate highway system is. It's all these threads. And that's why that infiltration happens. It's because we've created a living sponge with all these animals, all these microorganisms. Look at this. This is the stocking rate we used to run. I'd convert all my hay, all my pasture, all my dry matter intake for my cattle, back in 2012. This is when we're running around 2.5% soil matter, a little over 300 head. In 2021, we're way up here around 525. Now I told you, we're in the 700s. And it's probably averaging out to, 600 head a year. We have double the amount of carrying capacity on our ranch just because of the soil. I talked about this a little bit briefly, what that living soil did for us. And guys, remember, it was all because of the steak. I was trying to get energy in these cattle and get them to gain weight. And they did, because the grassland changed. They were able to realize the cafeteria. They were eating biodiversity. They were eating a lot of sugars that weren't there before because that soil was living underneath them. So we're gaining on those respects. But here's what the soil itself started doing with that sponge. This is in a rainstorm in 2018, one of our snowiest winters we ever had. And the rain poured so hard that it ran the snow off. And I'm driving a pickup out here and seeing that these cattle aren't sinking in the ground anymore. See that? And I'm not leaving pickup tracks. And the ground's partly frozen yet. It's because the soil is, even though it's saturated, is taking on more. It's because it can take more. It's that living soil sponge. Look at this. This is just beginning to melt, all right? But usually there'd be puddles out here. There's not. Look at this pivot track, center pivot track. That would be a repository for water. It's not right now because the soil sponge is taking care of it. And this is the result. You just have this incredible, incredible grass flush and resilience. This is in August. This is normally our slump time because it's our hottest, driest month of the year. And these cattle look fantastic. And this grass is all green. There's no brown grass out there. I wanted to show you this slide. This was just taken a few weeks ago on the James Webb Space Telescope. It's an orbiting telescope that's out on the other side of the moon right now, put up by NASA. And I really like this picture because it really spoke to me about what soil is. So this is a pinprick of dark sky that James Webb took a picture of, and long time exposure. So look at this, guys. It's a pinprick of there's no visible anything out there, but this is what came out from the shot. It's 700 galaxies in this one image. Okay, I can't count them all, but somebody said there's 700. I believe them. There's a lot of there's no stars except inside the galaxies there's galaxies. Each of them have like anywhere from 1 to 5 billion stars, who knows how many trillions of planets. Okay, so when I look at this, I'm like, wow, we really have no idea. We really have no idea what's out there. And, I mentioned this to Nicole Masters once. I said, hey, what percentage do you think we really know about what's going on underground? I just listened to Gary Zimmer, by the way. That guy's amazing. Okay, the guy blows me away because he's just this brilliant observer, and he dinks around with this stuff and he finds out cause and effect thing. And plus he keeps up on all science, and he just blows me away. I mean, that guy. But if I sat down and talked to Gary right now, I'm wondering what he would say, what his percentage of knowledge was. For Nicole, he said less than 5%. She said easily less than 5% is what we know today about living soils. Okay, that's what James Webb means to me. That's why I showed that picture, because it's like we can't even handle it. Okay, so look at this. This is why this is such a big deal for a rancher. If it was a conventional guy, working next to me, he's like, Glenn, why do you care about soils? I would say, well, my average daily gains are up 1.5 times. My doctoring rate has dropped 2.5%. My vet costs have dropped. I doubled our capacity in our home ranch. It was like getting another ranch for free. That's why you should care about living soils. Our death loss dropped. And I think it's just simply because these cows are able to maintain. And look at this. This is a refractometer glass. Okay, it's stupid. I hold up my phone and take pictures through my refractometer because I just geek out on, what the potential for soil exudates is on these plants. Okay, so I'll take a picture of a refractometer, and this is a 27 Brix, 27% sugar. Okay, and it's not all sugar, it's all these other things. There's all these phytochemicals that are rolling through there, and they show up on your refractometer. That's why the line is not like razor sharp. Whenever you have a faded line like this, it means there's a huge diversity of solutes in that sap. Anyway, 27% Brix, which is just unheard of, but we're regularly getting this. When we pick up a lease ranch, we're usually down between 10 and 15. After about 5 years, as the soil goes crazy and you start getting just tons of photosynthetic capability and efficiency because of the living soil underneath, you get these high Brix rates. And guess what high Brix means? It means they're going to eat tons and tons of these solutes, both in terms of phytochemical diversity that's going to maintain their health, but also they're eating all kinds of sugars that are going to really build weight gain. And guess what? Then you get marbled steaks. And that's a tomahawk steak that we cut off one of our beeves last fall. It's just an amazing amount of deposition. So a lot of people say, why? Why do you take them up there to that diversity? And I just showed you why. This is what Fred and I were looking at one day. So anyway, I took this little give and take picture. This is the give. So Annie's on this horse. She's bringing 450 head of cattle above me. I'm on horseback. I just thought I'm going to take a picture of this as the cattle first come through. So you can see, you got a lot of timber up here, not very thick grass, but there's enough. They're happy. And I watch them. They're eating all kinds of different plants. Here's this picture again after the cattle have all gone by. Now, guess in your mind a second. I'm just going to give you a second to say how long you think that took. Okay, I'm going to tell you 2.5 minutes. It was 2.5 minutes between photo A and photo B, between the give and take. And I wanted to show you that because that's, I think, the ancient rhythms learning from nature that we're missing. Buffalo used to cruise through this country like this. They just used to wipe it out really fast. And granted, there's a lot of grass left, and our footprint there is very short-lived, 2.5 minutes, right? And guess how long it's going to be before we go back? It's an average of 3 years. It's 3 years before it'll come back to this particular piece of ground. And that's what these plants have adapted and evolved under. And that's why grazing can be dynamite for plants and for creating biodiversity and for getting that nutrient cycling to go on, because the cows happen to have the same biology in their guts as the grasslands do. And they're always doing this exchange. They're always enriching each other. And look at this. This is really cool for me because these cattle are actually doing the right thing. This was a paddock. I put them on in the Valley Ranch, and I was kind of freaking out because it was October, and that alfalfa, that's this plant right here, Lucerne, for our dear friends on the other side of the world, down under, and the Brits, I guess they also call it Lucerne. But anyway, this alfalfa, and it's a highly toxic plant. If they just graze that, they fill their bellies up, the cow will die. Okay, and I won't go into reasons why that is. But anyway, I put him on this paddock, and I was like, I hope I didn't give him too much alfalfa tonight because, man, otherwise we're going to be in trouble this morning, especially after it freezes, because then that becomes highly toxic. But guess what happened? I turned around after I closed the gate on this polywire. These cattle actually put their heads down and grazed just the right thing. And it just blew me away because they went after the grass and filled their bellies with that. And I think I'm just beginning to learn that that's in them, that ability is in them. And as grazers and as managers of plants and animals, we often put them in these boxes and we create these limitation boundaries around them. And as a result, they can't express what is actually inside them, what's inside their genome. We do this with plants, we do this with animals, we do this with relating with both. We limit them so they can't fully express. And these young gals, these are two of my daughters, I'm jealous of them because, Linnea down there on the low end, she's 26 years old. Annie is 20. They spent their life living up here with these cattle. And we'll be at cow camp at night cooking dinner. And they'll start talking about what they saw. And they have this framework in their mind already about this relationship, that they're part of these living ecosystems. They are actually, these girls are part of this living ecosystem with these cattle, with those trees, with that grassland, with those wolves. The wolves howl at night and we don't mind. It's fine because we have the cattle and we have a relationship now with the land instead of being actors upon it. And it really boils down to husbandry for me. If you guys need me to wrap up, I can anytime. I got a few more slides to do, whatever you want to do. So just let me know. You okay, Natalie? You must
Yeah,
be.
everyone's saying keep going. Please
Okay.
keep. Going.
This is my wife. And, we talk a lot about stewardship, and I've been reading Wendell Berry. I used to read a lot of Wendell Berry. He's what got me thinking crooked this way in the first place and asking too many questions. Okay. Remember, it's a person putting into you at that time in the 80s. Wendell Berry was pouring into me because I was in conventional agriculture. I was in a toxic agriculture. We were using herbicides all the time and chemicals, and I wasn't into it at all. And I started reading Wendell Berry books, and it was an amazing transformation of mind because he started creating thoughts that I didn't have before. Anyway, when I'm reading this book right now, it's called The Art of Piling Brush. A weird title, but it's just basically the same Wendell Berry-esque reflections on the world and how he wishes it would have functioned in terms of agriculture. He keeps talking about husbandry, and he did even back 40 years ago when I started reading his books. And I realized that maybe our obsession with stewardship wasn't I wrote this down, Leslie, on a card. It says heart-centered because Leslie said that. And I realized that stewardship wasn't as heart-centered about these animals and plants and that soil biology, those animals underground that we needed it to be. And so I started embracing this word of husbandry. So I did some research on it. So first of all, I thought of husbandry in terms of the context of marriage. And, in the context of marriage, I've been married to my wife for 35 years, and I have yet to say I know her. I talked to a guy who was married 50 years a while back, a few weeks ago. I said, "How well do you know your wife?" He said, "Worse than ever, worse than ever." Anyway, here's an example. I said to Carol, I said, "Hey, let's get off the ranch for a week. This is the last fall." I said, "What do you want to do?" And he said, "I want to go chase orcas." And I said, "You what?" She said, "I want to go chase orcas." I said, you mean like killer whales? You want to go chase killer? Yeah, 100%. So we did. We went out in Puget Sound and we got in these whale chasing boats, and they don't harm the whales or anything. They don't chase them literally. They just find them so you can observe them and stay. I think they have to stay 300 feet away. They can't get away. And these whales are actually very comfortable. They'll surface and you'll be able to see them, but you got to find them. So that's what it's called, chasing. So anyway, totally in it. We had this fantastic time. I've never seen her smile that much in a long time. I never knew. Okay. This is what my wife's brain is to me. Okay. These are petroglyphs we saw down in southern Utah a few weeks ago. We went hiking down there just during the cold weather. We told the kids, "Hey, you're going to feed the cows. We're leaving." And I see nothing on this picture that I recognize. There's kind of a humanoid here. Carol said that was an alien, or no, that was a Anasazi person getting flown away in an alien spaceship. But anyway, I look at this and I'm like, I said to her, "This is your brain to me. This is your brain," because I have no idea what any of it means. No idea. She says, "Your brain is not that." I said, "Duh." She said, "Your brain is like an on and off switch." I said, "Yep, pretty much." But her brain, very complex. Okay. So anyway, I started thinking that in terms of husbandry, and I realized, in terms of agriculture, we've kind of lost our way because when we talk about husbandry, you know, it's not assuming that we know everything. It's not assuming we understand all the relationships. Instead, we find out, oh my gosh, there's way more here than I could have ever determined. And this is really important because these are the newlyweds. They got married and they're both 19 years old. They got married in October. And I want them to get this before I did. It took me, into my 40s before I started to put this all together, what that relationship to the land looks like, what that connectivity. And here's the other thing that's weird about husbandry. I don't know where all you viewers are as far as Jesus goes or anything like that, but there's this thing in the Bible where it says, husbands, love your wives like Christ loved the church. And the idea is that Christ died for the church. Okay. So that means husbandry can be construed to be something like, I'm going to die for this. I'm going to die for this. That I'm going to have that kind of heart-centered relationship with the land, with the soil, with the cattle, that I'm willing to put my life behind it. And that's what I realized was the tipping point for us, when we realized that it was so much more than just like we're going to get this profitability out, we're going to get the productivity up no matter what, we're going to do that. And what I realized instead is that it was about ensuring that there was at least continuance, and in the best way, enhancement of every kind of life that we live and work with. That's earthworms. We're not going to spray them. That's the stupid nematodes underground. It turns out that ivermectin is hell on nematodes. That's those king salmon that are returning to here that are in trouble. They're in trouble as a species. That means that our cows will have nothing to do with that river. Nothing to do with that river. Because to me, it's all connected. It isn't just about the soil. It's about the whole kahuna, and it's about our relationship with it. So there's 4 things I'm going to leave you with. First of all, I talked about the buffalo and all this stuff. And Carol and I spent a lot of time trying to figure out what this land looked like before we got here. There was a guy, Lorenzo Falls, who colonized this valley in 1873. That's when they colonized the valley. He wrote in his journal and said, the thing I really like about the Pacimaroi Valley is there's grass up to my stirrup and there's no sagebrush. Now the place is covered with sagebrush. So Lorenzo gives me an idea what the potential is, what the possibility is of the land. It's prehistory, it's history. The other thing is shut up and listen. And that's why I kept talking about, like Gary Zimmer, Fred Provenza, Elaine Ingram, I mean, these people, they got stuff to say, and it's like, shut up and listen. And when I shut up and listen, I can receive this information. And, they're all fantastic people. And if I don't get it, they're okay with it. They want me to get it. That's their objective. They're not trying to lay some heavy ego crap on me. They just want me to get it. And they're patient enough to get it. The same with this guy here. This is a beaver. This rodent has overturned my life because they are colonizing up on that range, on that grazing area. We have 85 head, as near as we can tell up there, where we had none before. And they're coming in and they're answering all these questions, and they're asking me a whole bunch more just by my observing them. I'm trying to shut up and listen with the beavers. Okay. And the other thing is, it's never about us. These are my daughters. You can see they're just beautiful and they're fantastic people. And it's, I'm 65. Look at my hair color. I'm not going to be around forever, but these kids are not going to either, but they're young. They can move forward. I give them hope and give them just the beauty of an option to live and work on this ranch because it's profitable, because the soils have enabled us to do this. And then I talked about this before, about allowing life to express. Here's Annie allowing life to express. But look at this. This is real quick. These are mama cows, okay? And you can only see a few here, but what you can't tell is that there's like 100 babies out there with them. And the rest of the mama cows are over here. And it's because we were having these weddings coming, and we just turned the cows out in May and June, said, go calve yourselves. We didn't do anything with it. There's 200 head down there, and they all calved themselves, and we came out really good in results in terms of, calves surviving and doing very well, 98% survival. But what's happening down here is we have coyotes, we have wolves, we have bobcats, we got mountain lions, we have bald eagles. So they're all predators that'll take out these calves, okay? But what happens is they leave intentionally a few cows down there to babysit these 70 or 80 calves. I don't know why they do it. I don't know how they do it, but I never knew they did it until we allowed nature to express. We allow nature to express. And this applies if you're a farmer. This applies if you're a soils person. We just have to let it express and see what nature can do. Because a lot of times we limit it. We put in row crops, or we put in rectilinear grazing systems, or we're running our combine over the field, and we let the combine create a field. Oh, we can't turn the combine down there because, well, the field's too tight. I mean, those kind of things are ridiculous from a nature standpoint, okay? Let nature express. And when you let nature express and people start seeing the results, these are some kids I had this year, it pulls the trigger in them. And and they become tribal. Look at these kids. I got a kid from California here. Here's another one from Florida. Here's another one from California. This one's from Scotland. This one's my daughter. These people are permanent, lifelong friends. They've created a community, and they've created a community because they've connected with the land together, and they had each other's backs. It was a really hard summer. They go from freezing cold to super hot, and then snowstorm, and then it's pouring rain, and they're stuck in cow camp without food because I can't get food up there because it's 2.5 hour drive and the road's mucked out and washed out, and I couldn't get to them, and they had to just live off the land for a few days and make it really hard. But in it, they build a connectivity to the land, to those cattle, to those wolves, to those horses, to each other that I think is missing from agriculture today. We just got our internship applications in 2 days ago. It closed. 700 applicants, 700 people like this age. You know what? I think they just want to learn the reality. They want to learn something different than social media. They want to learn about real relationships. They want to learn about the real land. They want to learn about real organic and what that means. They want to learn about continuance and enhancement of life instead of killing it. That's why they come. Anyway, I think that's all I have.
So be it, and so it is. A lot of heart-centered thoughts, initiations, and musings. Glenn, thank you. Thank
You
you for
bet.
We have a few questions in here, and
Okay.
could just pepper through them. That would be amazing.
Yep.
You answered a lot of them. Rad, someone said, cosmic. Wow. Every day's a learning experience. Yes, Bob, we love you here in the room with us and everything you send us to Heart and Soil. Let me see. You spoke earlier about scaling. Are you scaling in order to maintain profitability and sustain the business, or are there other organizational goals requiring you to scale further? For example, looking ahead to generational transfer of the ranch, creating more educational opportunities for those who want to learn regenerative ranching, etc. And is there a target and or limit to how large you feel you can scale?
Yes to all the above. So we are scaling, and it's just because I have young people. Most of them are my kids interested in the future in this ranch. Most of my neighbors say to their kids, "Don't plan on ranching. There's no hope here." But I say different, and so we have to scale up to provide an opportunity for them. So the requirements for scaling, in that context for them is that they have to go work for somebody else for a period of time. So they bring more knowledge to the table. And then they have to also bring their own whole on, their own creative whole on, which is an additional, stacked on enterprise on top of what we currently do. So we work all together in this kind of co-op of Alderspring Ranch, but then they all add their own on their own time. They add their own business to that, which then leverages the whole business as a whole. So those are the requirements, and we offer it not only to our kids, but also to our long-term employees who are really engaged. So that's why the scaling. We sell our beef off the ranch. We could sell way more. We sell out every 2 weeks because we process every 2 weeks, and within 3 days, it's all gone. And that's enough money income for us. And if we were going to scale above that, we'd have to probably find another ranch or something like that, which is not out of the question, but it's not my question to answer anymore because Carol and I are pulling out. I told the kids, hey, I just want to work for you guys. Free consultation, answer questions, kick the can down the road, whatever you want to do. But I want the stress and decision making to be off my wife and I, so we can look at petroglyphs down south again. Okay, so or chase orcas, one of the two. So anyway, so that's what the scaling is really about, and it's just because we have that opportunity because we're finding that soils can be profitable.
Mm-hmm. And you kind of walked us through this, but maybe just with more clarity, you can answer this question. If you're using rotational grazing or how you're using it, with the animals, and what is their normal feed? Have you attempted to use microgreens grown in a week or two before allowing animals to eat either the ground or from hydroponic trays dumped out for them?
You know, I have friends who've done the microgreens and they're still doing it, but they're very small scale. You know, our problem is our current process rate is between 350 and 400 head a year. And it was just too labor intensive for us to even consider. The other thing that it's just not in my wheelhouse right now because you know, the reason I told you the story about the range, even though it's not necessarily having to do with the soils down here on the ranch, is because we were we tried to move our entire situation into a mimic of nature that was kind of wild. And to me, that would be the antithesis of wild. So that's why, you know, there's no feedlot, there's no housing. Our cattle are outside 24/7. They never go inside. They haven't even been inside. They don't know what that's like. They don't know what a corral looks like, except for a few times a year they get sorted. Um, they're outside all the time. They're essentially living like wild animals, and we're given that nutrition choice so that they can do that and express that. So
Mhm.
that's why not in the greens. I'm not against it. It's just not a fit for what we do.
Mhm. And Glenn, have you noticed any fungus and mushrooms diversity are coming back? And if you do your cattle graze on them?
Oh no, they eat them. I have no idea what they are. They're probably mycorrhizal. You know, I'm guessing they are, you know, at the home place because I see them out on the pasture when we create a break and
Yeah.
they're gone the next day. So somebody ate them all. You know, they're very curious and they will sample stuff. You know, and I even see it on the high ranges. There's wild mushrooms all through there, and a lot of them are edibles. We have a lot of morels up there, and generally when cattle cruise through in that 2.5 minutes, they know what those things are. They go after them. So they eat a lot more than just, you know, plants. You know, in the plantae area, you know, they'll eat fungi. You know, they'll dink around with even trees and cactus, and I never
Yeah.
see them eating any live animals or anything. But they're omnivores. You know, they're omnivores in terms of the plant kingdom and fungus. You know, but because they'll try anything. But they're experimenters. They really enjoy it.
So true. Are you familiar with a beaver program and have you applied for it or are you a part of it?
Say what program?
It's a beaver program.
Beaver.
Mm-hmm.
I don't
I'm
know.
guessing
Don't know
it's a
what it is,
wildlife.
Tyler. Don't know
Yeah,
what
I'm
it is.
guessing it's a wildlife program. So Ethan, if you want to pop that in to the chat so people can learn more about it,
Well, that'd be
that's
great.
awesome. How many acres do you need for 300 head of cattle?
So for 300 head of cattle, you know, right now we're just under 1 cow per acre. And so that doesn't include the range. That is just this 20 to 25 inch precip zone that we operate on at 5,000 feet. And that's that 3 month growing season. So, you know, a lot of people, you know, they come up with this thing, oh, you know, Glenn, that's so cool what you do, but you'll never be able to support, you know, the Western culture of beef eating with your kind of paradigm. And the fact is, it's just simply not true. Because if everybody got to 1 cow per acre, and most people in America easily could, most people in Canada easily could, because their growing season is significantly longer than ours. So say it's just 1 cow per acre. If I was just going to use the states, these numbers are really easy to find if you don't believe me. Anyway, right now there's 89 million head of cattle in the U.S. That includes everybody from little babies to dairy cows to dry dairy cows to heifers to cattle and feedlots. That's everybody. 89 million head in our country, okay, of cattle. So that's all the consumptive beef included in that, and a lot of them are non-consumptive. So if I was going to support that 89 million head, that's 89 million acres. Real simple conversion, right? And that's so conservative. People could do, you know, if people in the heartland could do 2 or 3 cows per acre if they manage their grass and got their soils to respond. So anyway, say that conservative number is the real one. So it's 89 million acres to support 89 million cattle. Guess what? Right now in the US today, there's 893 million acres of farmland in the US. We're only going to use 1/10 of the farmland. to take care of all these cattle on grass. Okay. That means we could eliminate feedlots. That means we could use all the corn for something else. Right now, there's 90 million acres of corn. We could just cancel the corn and say, hey, we're going to replace that all with grassland and just stop the corn. So, and I'm not saying you got to do that. I'm just saying, no, 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 no. That is 100% a fallacy. And the other cool thing is right now we're putting, for every 1 pound of beef we produce, we did a life cycle analysis that took everything into account. Cows, belching, farting, methane. We took all the real numbers. I consulted with PhDs. It took me about 2 years to do. For every 1 pound of beef we produce, we put 4 pounds net carbon in the ground. Net. This is after everything subtracted. I even subtracted UPS's jet fuel to fly our product to Florida and New York, and I took all that jet fuel out. I corrected it out and did a gas calculation there because I want to make all that right. Every aspect. I mean, this card stock is in the calculation. This ballpoint pen is in the calculation. The heat in my house is in the calculation. Our food we eat as a family is in the calculation. It's all in there. The diesel fuel we use, everything. I wanted everything in there because I want to be sure that we were 100% climate positive and carbon negative. And so now, if all these people did this, the 1 cow per acre thing, the beauty of it is they could also be sequestering so much carbon in the ground so fast. That's what living soil does. That's what those mycorrhizae, they're made of carbon, folks. They're tying up amazing amounts of carbon. And that's why I get so, you can tell I'm a little excited about this, because it's like, no, the solution is right here under our feet for the carbon thing. It's not about pumping CO2 underground in abandoned oil wells. That's ludicrous. It's ludicrous, okay? But instead, it's about creating a living soil sponge, and interacting it with animals, animals that are run in a way that those plants adapted and evolved and were designed to do. And that's what we're trying to emulate. And it's so easy because nature has got the paradigm out for us. And there's so many people who are 100% experts in this that we can talk to and learn from, just like on this summit right here. These people that are on this summit are the people that I want to make the phone call to, because they're the ones that they have the answers to move me forward. I get stuck a lot. I'm like, wait, this isn't working out. Like this winter's been tough for us with, more cattle. And it's like, oh crap, I don't know how to do this. But there's a path forward. And a lot of times I get to ask people for how to make that path forward. Anyway, that's probably more
So,
than you want to hear.
so cool. Well, I just have a couple more questions for you, Glenn. Do you have a couple more minutes?
Yeah, no, go ahead. That's fine. I
Okay.
went over, so you go over too. It's
People are
fine.
stay on too. Okay, awesome. So I experienced green grass in our fields in Saskatchewan the last couple of years too, and it was just so fascinating. And
Yeah.
last year, like the last winter before this one, there was just so much, and my eyes like literally bugged out of my head. I was like, there's a ton of green grass here.
Yes.
So yeah, it's really it's phenomenal, and it's like minus 40, minus
Yeah.
30 degrees Celsius. So it's mind
They,
blowing.
they, they said it couldn't be done, right?
Yeah, it's fascinating. I'm just like, how is that
Yes.
possible?
Yeah.
But now we know how and why. So, Glenn, also the theme of the Soil Summit is biodiversity, cultivating life.
Yes.
What when you think about biodiversity, what does that mean to you?
So biodiversity, it's really what I think conventional agriculture is. Sometimes I feel like they're dead set against it. They're dead set against it. Because I feel like, I've worked in so many aspects of conventional agriculture, whether it be cattle. I used to remember Gary was talking about that Fair Oaks Dairy. I used to work on a place that grew corn for them in Indiana, so very, very conventional Indiana corn and soybean ground. We could see Fair Oaks Dairy from a place I worked there. So, and in that environment, I just felt like we were hell bent on, not only saying we're not going to offer continuance of life, we're actually going to cause destruction of 90% of life. And that life is the biodiversity. And I can't even really easily describe it. It's just, I think it's the functionality by design. when we go back and we look at what the elk do, that we used to calve in the winter. It was this crazy thing where we'd freeze our butts off, and we wouldn't sleep, and we'd lose calves because they'd freeze to the ground before we could get to them, and they couldn't get up, and it was horrible. It was this horrible paradigm that agriculture is still caught in. There's people calving all around me right now, and they believe they need those extra months on the calf to make a good calf market in the fall. And also, it's about they want to turn their calves out on the range, and they want those calves old enough so that they can go with mom up there. And I understand those points, but it did seem like to me when we're calving like that, we were actually life destructive. Instead of when I saw these elk running around calving happily in May and June in the mountains all around us, I, I did a double take because I'm like, what are we doing? And then I talked to some friends who were doing it already, and they just laughed and said, when you come over here, you'll find out what life looks like. So biodiversity wasn't only the plants, the animals, the soil, those elk. It was my view of biodiversity is it's us too. It's okay for us to be part of an ecosystem. I used to be a kind of a preservationist. There was a time I 100% hated cows because I saw the degradation they were doing. And I was a forest ecologist, and these cows would come in and eat my plantations. These cows would come in and ruin creeks. They'd take away fish habitat. They'd poop in the creeks, poop in the rivers. They'd darken, creeks with sediment. And I was like, cows are the problem. Cows are 100% the problem. But then, after being in it, I realized that we were part of the problem. And it was because we didn't embrace the mimic of nature and embrace the celebration of biodiversity and biodiverse landscapes. And then we could be part of it. It's like those wolves. I mean, there's this fewer in Colorado right now. They reintroduced wolves a couple of weeks ago. And I just said to my crew, I said, I don't even get it anymore. I don't even get why they're so against the wolf reintroduction, because they're just part of the ecosystem, and so are we. We're part of that biodiversity.
Yeah, so true.
So yeah, so that probably didn't answer your question. And
It did.
I
No,
put
it's
my finger on it.
fabulous. Yeah,
It's a tough
fabulous.
one.
I don't think there's any right or wrong answer. It's just it's a perspective of where a person is,
Yeah,
and
it's about where a mind is really,
yeah. And
and that's changing. Go ahead.
what about cultivating life? What does cultivating life mean to you?
So cultivating life is, really part of that thought process shift that I was talking to you about, because, when I was practicing agriculture in the 80s and 90s, I had a false sense of cultivation of life. Because, we'd put nitrogen fertilizer on, I remember one farm I worked on in the 70s. It was hot. It was a hot, humid environment where we were working, and we were growing sweet corn for New York City um, farmers markets. And I'm spreading fertilizer, wearing a pair of cutoff Levi's, pair of work boots, and that's it, because it's hotter than crap. It's 101 degrees out, and it's 100% humidity. And my boss hands me a 5-gallon bucket full of ammonium nitrate, and he said, side dress this field. And there's 10 acres. And it's too high to run a piece of equipment over, and I'm just throwing this stuff down. And, I talked to him at the end of the day. I was like on fire. I was burning because of sweat with ammonium nitrate. You're just, you got nitric acid burn, you're a walking gunpowder bomb, but, anyway, I talked to him and said, why the crap are we doing this? And he said, because, you know, we're going to be way more productive. These ears are going to be way bigger. We're going to have, less ears per bushel. We're going to crank on this, and if I would have pushed him on it, Natalie, he would have said, we're cultivating life. So we get this false sense of what cultivation of life, what we're cultivating there was productivity. And, there's a lot of people stuck on that kind of this monolith of productivity. And everything else, this monolith is erupting from just just 100% burned up dirt. Okay. Because that's what a lot of conventional agriculture is. It's dirt now. It's lifeless dirt. There's nothing alive in there. And we have this monolith of productivity that we always worship and bow down to. And we feed these chemicals in. We say we're cultivating life in this one aspect. We're doing that. And it's completely wrong. What I would say cultivating life actually now for me is that monolith comes down and everything has an even playing field. I mean, all aspects of life now have an even playing field because, even us, we're part of that playing field. And that might be a nematode, that might be a protozoa, that might be a rhizobium bacteria, that might be um, some mycorrhizal fungi that I can't even pronounce. Okay. I can't even see it. It's like that James Webb Space Telescope thing. It's all that life. For me, now I'm just barely starting to put this together. And it's because I'm slow in the uptake, I think. But I actually start thinking about that life underground, and I never used to, because you can't see it, right? Every now and then you'll see a mushroom come up, and you'll say, "Oh, that's probably mycorrhizal now," But I never knew that before. Never would have thought that. But you can't see that life underground. But I see the fruit of it. I see the effects, right? I see that water goes into the soil. I see that the cows are doing way better than they used to. And now all of a sudden I realize, wow, when we're all connected like this, why wouldn't you want to cultivate life? Even life you can't understand.
Amen. So be it. And so it is. I like that. Thank you, Glenn. Thank you for sharing your heart
You
and
bet.
your heart-centered farming and way of discovering and the questions that you ask and the humbleness and humility you bring to um, learning, and the change in perspective and the change in paradigm, and that it's okay to change our mind and it's okay to
No,
have
it is.
understandings,
Yes,
right?
exactly.
That's a
And,
very
and
powerful way to live life.
there's so many resources. This conference is one of them, and you got so many great people in this conference that, man, there's so much opportunity to I would get stressed out and high centered on a lot of things, and then I started realizing what opportunities were in just conversation. Called Fred Provenza, drove 5 hours to get down here and said, "I'm coming down." This guy's, world renowned. And he says, "I'm coming down. Tell me when."
What a
And
gift.
that just blows me away.
Yeah, yeah, it does. Well, it blows me away. The grace and generosity of all the speakers who come and share their story in Heart and Soul magazine and for the Soil Summit.
Yep.
So thank you. You're one of those awesome humans. So you can find Glenn on the web at alderspring.com, on Facebook at Alderspring, on Instagram at Alderspring_ranch. So, and we also put a link to his interview that we did with Heart and Soil magazine in the chat there too. So be sure to go give their farm a follow and connect with all their resources. And his daughters have a few really cool businesses as well that they're running
They do.
in conjunction with Alderspring Ranch, some photography and some social media.
Yep.
I think there's marketing in there. So there's a plethora of resources that you can tap into there. There's one more thing. Oh, there was a question I saw about how do we get the farm bill to shift the the focus on soil. So, Gabe Brown, we have Gabe Brown coming on tomorrow, and he
Yeah.
is his hands and feet are on the ground with that, and his hands are both in the soil and in the paperwork and in the lobbying of that. So if you want to say anything to that, then I'd love to hear it. I also want to honor we're already 14 minutes past the time that we had said we were going to go. So
No, it's cool. So that is a tough nut to crack, because I've been I've been in their offices, a bunch of them, like over the past couple of years. I actually brought my daughters with to visit some of these guys, representatives and senators in their offices in DC. Despite COVID and stuff like that, we still got in. So it was really exciting and it was a lot of fun. And they're generally, a lot of them are good, solid people, but we come there and we just visit and hang out with them. And the next guy comes in and says, "Hey, I'd like to contribute $1 million to your campaign." So that's a very difficult premise, and it's a very difficult thing to overcome with just relationships. So I really think it has to go back to the constituency. I really like Gary and I really like Gabe in that they, in their wisdom, have put it out there enough. They've gained enough momentum, and it's all been grassroots. It's all been through drip, 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 and relationship. And they have got enough constituents of their own who didn't vote for them ever, but who agree with what they're saying. And they then represent them to get into the halls of, these debates and congressional chambers and whatnot. And as a result, I see them getting a lot of time. So I think that's super valuable to like endorse those people who are, forefront speakers in this, because, if like Carol and I had to write our congressman last week about another, unrelated to soil issue. And, we just basically took a number and, I just felt like we were 100% unheard. But if there's enough constituents to get representation among the people to represent in strength, like what Gabe has done, he's got enough critical mass in these farmers now that there is a lot of farmers who like having Gabe Brown as a spokesperson for soil health and like him being a representative to Congress and those sorts of things. I saw Rick Clark also testifying recently. He's an Indiana farmer who's doing wonderful things in Indiana right now. Um, so I think that's what it's still a drip, 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 Natalie. It's still
Yeah,
like a
I
relationship
concur.
one by one.
I concur. And just also really just deepening into your own personal journey and having conversations with your friends and your
Yes.
family
Yes, exactly.
you're in
Yes.
relationship with. And that is,
Yeah.
and that goes back to the grassroots of it, right? And
Yes.
so the farm bill may or may not ever shift. We actually don't, we have control, don't have control over that. What we do
Yep.
have control over is how we show up,
Yeah.
the conversations we have, and the actions that we take and how we live our life. And that is
Exactly.
really where it starts. And the only other thing I just wanted to add to that is to just really encourage you to have the conversations. And when you're wanting to make shift at the government or lobbying level, that's when you're picking up the phone, you're making the phone call, or
Yes.
your letter,
Yes.
because every phone call you make represents, it depends on what county or province or state you're in, but it represents hundreds or thousands of people. So you
Yes.
might think you're not making a difference, but that one phone call is representing 100 or 700 voices. That one letter is representing hundreds or thousands of voices. So pick up the, pardon me, pick up the phone, write the letters, and
Yes. Well, even better if you can have those conversations. That's what the drip 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 is for me, because we sell beef to thousands of people all over the country and they're getting it, because they
yeah.
read our content and they're getting it. Now if all those, like, say it's 10,000 people, right now we have like 14,000 customers on our customer base. If they all wrote a short note or made a phone call with regard to an issue like this,
Mhm.
now I think we have some power. We have some traction. So it's all about the numbers, but it's drip drip to build that relationship and build those numbers. So I think we can change it from that standpoint. I think you're right.
Yeah. One conversation, one heart-centered conversation at a time.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, big love to you, Mr. Glenn Elzinga, and to your family and to your beautiful wife and your awesome daughters and their partners and your working crew at Alderspring Ranch. Deep gratitude, deep thank you. And
Thank
you
you.